Hi friends, welcome back to my channel. As you can see, I'm doing something a little bit different today. I never actually intended to make a video of this specific painting, but what happened was I was like, sure, I'll do a little bit of filming of this little gouache practice because I could, and I actually was really happy with how this painting turned out, so because of that I thought it would be really fun to show the progress of it. Unfortunately, some of it gets kind of cut out due to the super narrow vertical phone format, but most of the painting will be in frame. And as you can see, I'm just starting to lay in the background. The background's pretty dark, so I'm just throwing in some of that stone texture from my reference picture. Something else that's a little different today is that I'm just doing this voiceover, just kind of winging it, just to have some practice at winging it while I do a painting. I don't just want to do fairy tales. I mean, obviously I have a lot of fun with the fairy tales and I'm going to continue doing that. I just want to switch it up a little bit, show different kinds of process, talk a little bit more about how I'm creating some of these pieces, just to keep it fresh and exciting and do all kinds of different things. And what I'm working with right now is the Miya Himi gouache, the jelly gouache. I have the Miya Himi set and also the ArrtX set. They just kind of have different colors. So there's some overlap. There's a lot of whites, obviously. They both come with, the white and the black and the Prussian blue. But I liked combining them because there's the yellow ochre in the ArrtX set that I really like and I'm getting a lot of use of, and that one isn't in the Miya Himi set, and I'm going to be using a lot of that on the costume. And I'm creating this piece in my watercolor sketchbook that is by Rubens, which I bought through AliExpress. I'll leave a link below for the materials that I'm using. And I do enjoy using this sketchbook for gouache, maybe a little bit more than I do for watercolor. For watercolor, I find that it dries quite quickly and it makes it harder to get really nice blends. For gouache, I'm a little less concerned about the paint staying dry for a long time, and because of that I feel like this sort of cheaper end paper is better suited to like a drier medium, essentially. Because when I'm working with watercolor, I really do enjoy working wet and wet, and in gouache it's a lot easier to work in layers. As you can see, I'm doing some layers on the face right now, and having it dry relatively quickly I find is kind of an advantage for gouache, or at least it doesn't really affect the usage in the same way that a fast drying paper will negatively affect the way that I do a watercolor. And of course the nice thing about gouache is it's going on opaquely. Relatively, the Miya Himi gouache is pretty transparent, as well as the ArrtX one. They're both relatively transparent gouaches, and because of that I have to sort of fight with them a little bit or add quite a lot of white if I want them to layer heavily on top of each other, but I find that they don't blend too badly, and you can glaze with them. You can get kind of almost like a watercolor wet and wet effect, almost. Not in the same way where the colors will be bleeding in and forming like their own kind of patterns. You don't get that as much. Gouache pretty much behaves itself. When you put it down, that's pretty much where it's going to stay. But when it's wet and thin, you can get a very watercolor-like effect, like the stones in the background. Yeah, in the painting right now, I'm just laying in a lot of the light colors that will be kind of the basis for the outfit. There's a lot of shading that I was trying to replicate. I think I could have simplified that a bit more just to have made things a little easier for myself. I find that simplifying large spaces of value early on in the painting process makes things a lot easier, but that's something I'm gradually growing to learn how to do. And I really wanted to do something more interpretive for this piece. So that shoulder area that I'm working on right now, I initially planned to just kind of do loose, painterly, interpretive, just strokes of like super vibrant color. I ended up instead becoming more faithful to the reference photo I was using. This is a study based on a reference photo I found in social media. And yeah, the more I looked at the photo, the more interested I became in the complexities of the design of the Venetian costume. So I ended up not going with the interpretive idea, partially because, honestly, this costume kind of confused me. It was just a lot of ruffles, a lot of layers, and so I just kept exploring with the shapes I was making. And getting a little frustrated with that bodice area. I remember that it was something that would have been an area where it would have been a really good idea to lay in that initial value, the initial darkness, in a way that was more cohesive and faithful to the actual value scale of the reference image. But I didn't. So there was a lot of just kind of noodling around trying to figure out, because I think at the moment, I think I end up lightening it, but right now it's just quite dark and almost as dark as her eye, and the eye is one of the darkest pieces or parts of the entire piece. But yeah, as you can see, when I'm layering, the white that I'm using is actually relatively transparent, so everything's going on quite thinly and you can see a lot of the color underneath. This kind of gouache, being like a more traditional gouache as opposed to an acrylic gouache, will activate the color underneath it. And mostly that was working to my advantage, I think, for this one. I'm still relatively new when it comes to gouache, so I'm still learning a lot about it. I don't really have that intuitive grasp of things that I've developed over time with watercolor. With the watercolor, I've been working in watercolors for, I think 4 or 5 years now. So I have like a pretty good grasp of how wet I want things, how dry I want things. And with gouache, it's really more of that explorative process. I'm really kind of in that beginner's mindset where it's all play, because I don't really know what I'm doing. I struggle a lot with trying to find the consistency of paint. I think that struggle is amplified by the fact that the Miya Himi gouache I'm using is quite transparent. So if I really want to get a heavy coat of something, it's a lot harder to do because, and by heavy coat, like if I really want to just like cover an area and flatten it out, it's going to be a lot harder to do with the gouache I'm using. And I know that's a potential drawback to getting this particular type of jelly gouache. That being said, I enjoy it. I also have some artist quality gouaches, but I haven't really played a whole lot with them, partially because to get more comfortable, I really liked having the cheap gouache on hand just to get more comfortable with the process so I could do more pieces like this, right? This was just done in an evening and a morning, or I want to work in my sketchbook. I'm super inspired by this beautiful photograph, and yeah, I wanted to just pull out the paint and make stuff happen. One thing that's really fun about gouache for me is that it's just kind of flat and bold in a way that watercolor isn't. You know, watercolors come on pretty thin at the beginning. There's no real boldness to the color. There shouldn't be when you're doing initial washes a lot of the time. And just, it feels like just kind of magical to use gouache sometimes, where I'm just like, oh, the color's so bold and creamy and it's just there. I suppose I'd have the same effect if I worked with oils or acrylics, but I don't love acrylic. And the one time I worked with oils, it was weird, man. Like, oils are oily and I was not prepared for the texture. So gouache feels a little bit more like my comfort zone while still having like a newness. It's exciting. Oh yeah, and here I'm coming in to brighten up the little jewelry bits. This was quite a quick piece. So I'm just polishing up the final details here. I was able to make some of the details more abstract, and there are like a lot of glittery bits and things to the costume. You're gonna see in a moment I come in with gel pen to make things a little sparkly. Unfortunately, it's the like clear sparkly jelly roll, and it just doesn't show up well on camera. So because of that, I don't think I was really able to get like the glitter effect to show up on my phone camera. But, you know, I tried. It looks pretty good in the sketchbook. Yeah, so I'm just adding some of the darker details, putting in some of the darker colors, and then coming in with a wet brush to soften it up. Yeah, here I'm adding those jelly roll details. Just kind of adding a little bit of sparkle all over the bodice and neckline area. Pretty much just final details at this point. Yeah, see, I'm trying to tilt that, now I'm getting the tape off, but you can't really see the sparkle. Always got to include the tape removal. Tape removal is just like the best part. Oh, of course I'm covering it up with my hand there. And there you have it. There she is. Ah, yeah, that was me trying to get the sparkle. I don't know, does that show up at all? There's like a bit of a sheen. And there's the final piece. Thanks for joining me today. Bye!